I'm going to be hot and bothered if Indiana is disrespected in the playoff rankings because they're disrespected in the AP poll right now.
You are Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in this, the greatest sport on planet Earth. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. What to expect when the committee comes out with their rankings with regards to the SEC, because the AP loves the SEC. Should they? We're going to explore that notion with three teams playing for their playoff lives this week in the good old Southeastern Conference, where it does in fact just mean more quite often, but we'll see if that means they get more playoff spots than they deserve. And unranked versus ranked upsets have been, shall we say, abundant this year. There's going to be at least one this weekend. I'll talk about that coming up later, but let's start with Indiana. Indiana is so underrated. I mean, holy crap. Now, I've listened to Josh Pate a time or two before, and the question in response to this team's overrated, this team's underrated. Well, what are they rated? Well, they're rated 8th. Spencer, what would you rank them? I would rank them ahead of every team that is in front of them, not named. I'll put Ohio State, Georgia, and Oregon up there. I'd have Indiana as the number 4 team in the country right now because they are 9-0. They are 9-0, and they're ranked number 8 in the country. Well, Spencer, do you even have any numbers to back this up? Yeah, believe it or not, I do indeed prepare for this show, despite what some of you may think. So a year ago, when Ohio State and Michigan played, Ohio State was ranked number 2. Michigan was ranked number 3. And Michigan went into that game, the eventual national champion, mind you, 11-0, and they were beating teams by an average of 34 points per game. It was utter domination. Why don't you go look at that schedule and tell me through their first 9 games how many teams that they played were just, barn burners. I mean, Penn State was in there. It was a good team. They beat them by 9. Do you think if Indiana played Penn State right now, if Indiana were to play Penn State on a neutral field or frankly in Happy Valley, would you take your hard-earned money and place it on the Nittany Lions to win the game? I sure wouldn't. I have a hard time betting against Indiana, who through 9 games this year are beating their opponents by an average of 33 points per game. A 1 point per game difference than the eventual national champions from a year ago who had not played a difficult schedule. They're beating up on all these crappy teams. That's what Indiana is doing. And what is happening here from the AP voters, and I hope gets rectified when the college football playoff rankings come out later tonight, is that they're falling susceptible to 2 things. Number 1, their own preseason perceptions. I didn't think Indiana was good. When they played UCLA a long time ago in this season, I quipped that it would be a battle for last place in the Big Ten. Well, that's not accurate in any way, shape, or form because Indiana is one of the best teams in the Big Ten, and UCLA has won 2 Big Ten conference games, both of them on the road. I don't know how to explain that either, but I digress. So I'm not latching on to the preseason notion where Indiana had a win total, according to our friends at FanDuel, of 4.5, where Indiana was 3-9 last year and brought in a bunch of guys that most people hadn't heard of. You hadn't watched Curtis Rourke throw a football before the season started. You've seen him throw it a few times now because he does it all over the yard every single week that he plays. I would also like to add that Indiana won a game without Curtis Rourke by 2 touchdowns. 31-17 against Washington is the closest game they've played this year. They had their backup quarterback. And they played a 14-point game. So Indiana is criminally underrated right now. They should not be behind Tennessee, who has a road loss to an unranked Arkansas team who's good, but by the AP voters' own logic, is not ranked right now. And Penn State, look, I have been ringing the alarm bell on Penn State is good, but they are not great for quite a long time. And as I said, in a very simple thought exercise, who are you putting your money on? Indiana or Penn State? I'm going to go with Indiana. And by the way, you think about the offense and Curtis Rourke throwing the ball all over the yard. Why don't you go look at Indiana's defensive metrics? They're very good on both sides of the ball. They brought in a bunch of transfers, and it's worked very quickly. Like if Colorado flew under the radar and had the success they're having this year last year, that's what Indiana is right now. Texas got housed by Georgia on their home field. Now, Georgia went and won that game. Georgia also lost to a 2-loss Alabama team. I can make the case that Indiana should be the number 2 team in the country right now. They haven't lost. They beat Nebraska 56-7. Ohio State beat them by 4 on their home field. And Oregon's 9-0, and they beat Ohio State. And that's a better win than Indiana's got anywhere. But the second thing, in addition to preseason perception, that AP voters are falling victim to that I am more than a little curious to see if the playoff committee does as well, is the old brand bias. Because if this was a Maize and Blue M or that Buckeye O with 9-0 and a 33-point per game margin of victory, yeah, Indiana would be ranked a lot higher than 8th. So as this playoff committee gets set for their first ever 12-team rankings, oh boy. Now remember, the 12-team playoff is going to solve everyone's problems in college football, and there will be no vehement disagreements about the rankings tonight. But it's a pretty historic day. It's a historic day in college football. I am man enough to admit there are a lot of things I'm interested to see, but I hope Indiana is ranked inside the top 5 because there's no way they are only the 8th best team in college football, that they look that way or that their resume is that way. You can say, well, they don't have a great win yet. Okay, that's completely and totally fair. But if a team were as good as semifinal caliber at the very least, and they played Indiana's schedule, please tell me how much better they could look. How much more impressive does Indiana need to be for them to be ranked higher? That's what I'm curious about. And there are certainly complicated factors. I don't know that Penn State has a great win on their schedule. I don't know why Penn State's even ranked ahead of Tennessee. I mean, they beat Illinois 21-7. That's their best win of the season. They had an impressive comeback against USC, who was 4-5. They had a good win against Wisconsin. I thought they would lose that game. They didn't. They won at West Virginia week 1. I thought they would win that football game. Like, Penn State deserves to be a top 10 team. I don't know why Penn State's ranked ahead of Tennessee. I definitely don't know why Penn State is ranked ahead of Indiana, because I think Penn State is pretty clearly the 4th best team in the Big Ten right now. I think it's Oregon. I think it's Ohio State. Might even be Indiana. Good thing they're going to play in a couple weeks, and we're going to see. FanDuel doesn't trust the Hoosiers yet, but you know what? I have a hard time not trusting them because they go out and prove it week after week. This is a really good football team, and they are criminally underrated, and I hope the playoff committee at least puts them inside the top 5, or I worry about what that could mean for the rankings that we will see continue to come out as the weeks go on. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter. What are we going to see in the SEC? What should we expect to see for the Southeastern Conference? Will they be handled what people would deem fairly, or with what people might deem, some people, SEC bias? Well, we need to set our expectations there so you won't be disappointed. That's coming up next. First, Locked On College Football fans, time to recognize the Roy Player of the Week. So far this season, we've pooled over $20,000 to support players on Roy. Micro deposits lead to massive change. And with the Roy app, you can direct your support in the NIL space to the athletes you love, ensuring that all funds go to the specific player that you choose. I tell you what, lots of options for the Roy Player of the Week this week. And if you want to donate to a specific player, you can go join Roy. It's really easy. Download Roy now and the NIL game with no subscriptions and no fees. And be sure to check him out on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Roy_return_on_you for more information. This week's Roy Player of the Week, Cam Ward. I mean, come on, 400 yards, 5 touchdowns. The fact that Miami covered a 20-point spread when they trailed by 11 in the third quarter is sickening, but it's also awesome. Roy, support the players, change the game. Once you're done with that, check out FanDuel. Why? It's America's #1 sportsbook, and right now, new customers commit $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. And do you want to bet college football? They've got college football. And if you think there's value on Indiana, who are just a machine, betting Indiana against the spread is the easiest bet of the week. I don't even know what they are against the spread. I imagine they're somewhere close to undefeated against it because, boy, I tell you, they cover every week. They're a money-making machine. And remember, you get 150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet at FanDuel.com. FanDuel.com, that's where you go. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Did you know that currently there are 8 SEC teams ranked inside the top 25? I often hear complaints from fans of the Big 12 or the ACC, for instance, or the Pac-12 once upon a time, RIP, that the SEC cannibalizing itself shows the depth of the league, whereas other conferences doing it shows how weak those leagues are. There are times when those complaints are completely valid. Here's the issue. There's only one 3-loss team that is ranked at the moment. There will be at least one, maybe 2 after this weekend, depending on whether LSU beats Bama. One of those teams will have 3 losses, or really what I meant to say, and then I got crossed up saying my words there a bit, is whether Ole Miss is able to beat Georgia. Georgia has 1 loss, but Ole Miss has got 2. I'll talk about Ole Miss, LSU, and Bama in a little bit, but I came into this season thinking the SEC would get 4 teams into the college football playoff, and the AP voters have laid some groundwork here for just that, maybe even more. Now you may say, Spencer, the AP voters don't matter. I think in the history of the playoff committee, when you look at the rankings that they put out versus what the AP voters put out, teams aren't usually, I hope Indiana is an exception to this generalized rule here, teams aren't usually more than one or two spots off of their spot in the AP poll. There are usually a lot of similarities because you don't know every single person that votes on the AP or that votes for a college football playoff ranking, for instance, but they think very similarly. Whatever you think that mentality is, the people at the highest level seem to think pretty similarly about this sport. Whether it's a good thing or bad thing, I think that's just the way it is. So when I look at what they have done with the SEC, I think the AP voters have laid the groundwork for everybody. They've laid the groundwork. And now that the foundation's been put down, well, the College Football Playoff Committee can start putting up walls. They can put up a couple of retaining walls this week, and they can get some floor plans, and they can meet with the architect and really start to put this together to put not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 teams from the SEC into the playoff. If you go into this particular ranking thinking, hey, could there really be that many teams alive? Well, it's pretty simple. There's a crazy tiebreaker scenario that could ensue if certain games go a certain way. I'm not worried about that right now. Those have a tendency to work themselves out. But the world that a lot of people would lament, but I'd say, why are you surprised, in which the SEC gets 5 teams into the playoff, it's right there in front of you. There are 3 top 10 teams. They can't all make the SEC championship game. And by the way, the ones that do are both going to the playoff. So there's going to be at least one team, like the bare minimum the SEC gets into the playoff is 3. That is bare minimum. There is no world I can foresee, barring chaos unlike anything we've ever seen in the history of the sport, in which the SEC gets fewer than 3 teams into the playoff. So that's pretty easy. But here's where it starts to get complicated. If Texas continues to win, but loses to Texas A&M last week of the regular season, those teams will both be 10-2. Because Texas A&M has got a cupcake in Auburn before they play Texas, and they have a bye this week. So Texas A&M is sitting there at 7-2. Well, if they're 10-2 and Texas is 10-2, you think those teams are getting left out? Because Texas will be ranked in the top 5, which is where they are now, and they won't lose between now and then in this hypothetical, and Texas A&M will pick up a top 5 win. They'll move into the top 10. They're not going to drop Texas out of the top 10 for losing on the road to a team they're about to rank inside the top 10 as well. So then you'll have the easy path to 4. And then you just need one of LSU or Alabama, or dare I say Ole Miss, to also finish the season at 10-2. LSU and Alabama play themselves this week. It's going to be really fun. It is a night game. It is at Death Valley there in Baton Rouge. It's going to be phenomenal. The loser probably out of the playoff. That's just reality. You're going to have 3 losses, 9-3. I don't care if you're Big Ten or SEC. You're probably not getting in. Now, that's another one of those interesting things that I will be looking for as the playoff committee rankings are released on a weekly basis, starting with Tuesday night. But 9-3, hard to see, especially when for LSU, one of those losses is to USC, who are battling to be 500 this year. And for Alabama, one of those losses is to Vanderbilt, who, look, Vanderbilt's a pretty solid football team. Like, just call a spade a spade. Vanderbilt is a solid football team. They might lose this week to South Carolina. They also might win this week. I think winner of that game gets to be ranked inside the top 25. And if you're Alabama, you'd probably rather, I think, I'm not entirely sure. I think you'd rather have South Carolina win that game so that your win looks better rather than your loss. But I think you can argue that either way. Vanderbilt's got LSU and Tennessee to close the regular season, by the way, just in case you were thinking of chaos scenarios, because they're absolutely out there. So the world in which darn near half of the 12-team playoff is made up of the SEC, it's right there in front of your face. It is right. I mean, it could not be more readily apparent. That also depends on how they view. Like, Ole Miss in the AP poll is ranked 16th. What if the playoff committee puts them at 13th? Oh boy, you'd have a problem. I don't think they would do that, but I'm just saying, what if they did? Do they really trust SMU? Are they going to put Boise State that high? What do they think about Notre Dame? They lost to Northern Illinois, for goodness sake. So the SEC, just as we all anticipated, set to dominate the playoff. 3 is the absolute bare minimum. I'm hard pressed to see a world where they don't get 4 and 5. It's right there to be had. It's right. The possibility is so incredibly real. By the way, just ponder this. What if Indiana beats Ohio State and Ohio State's 10-2, and suddenly they have to go up against resumes in the SEC? They'd have a road win at Penn State. Ohio State should be a big Penn State fan the rest of the year. You should be looking at Penn State saying, please beat Washington, Purdue, Minnesota, and Maryland. Minnesota's the toughest of those games by far, but don't sleep on Washington this week. I'm going to talk about that more later on today's show. It's craziness. It's craziness. It's going to upset a lot of you, but I'm just telling you, it's going to be right there. It's going to be right there. You're going to look at it and go, the SEC is going to run this thing. This stinks. Well, that's what you get in the 12-team playoff. It's what a lot of you wanted, and this is going to be the byproduct. But excited to see how that goes. Quick note here. Ole Miss, LSU, Bama, likely playing for their playoff lives. But likely. Not guaranteed. Nothing is guaranteed in this sport. The parity in college football is tremendous, and I think the transfer portal is the biggest cause for that. When you look at what Ole Miss has put together this year, I think of the 3 teams that would vie to be a 9-3 team in the college football playoff, they'd be the least likely to make it happen, because they do have a road win at South Carolina 27-3. That's very good. Their road win at Arkansas last week, also pretty solid. Neither of those teams are actually ranked right now. So if the season ended today, if Ole Miss loses to Georgia, but they beat Florida, which I don't think is a given, and they beat Mississippi State, and they're 9-3, they'd have losses to Kentucky, LSU, who will still be ranked in some capacity, Georgia, and they would not have a current ranked win unless South Carolina works their way in the top 25. I think that's pretty weak. I think that's pretty darn weak. On the other side of things, LSU would have losses to Texas A&M, Alabama, unranked USC. They play Florida, Vanderbilt, Oklahoma down the stretch. I don't know that that's that strong either. Alabama's the interesting one, because Alabama's got that win against Georgia, and that is looming incredibly large. Vanderbilt lost. Boy, that's not ideal, but Alabama can certainly win their final 3 games after LSU. The question is, will the committee continue to respect a loss at Vanderbilt and at Tennessee? If they were to lose to LSU, all 3 of their losses would be on the road. How would those things get weighted? I don't know is the honest answer, but we are certainly going to find out. My gut tells me Ole Miss, LSU, and Alabama are playing for their playoff lives this week. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments, or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter. I've got some upsets for you. We've had them just about every week. Unranked, ranked. It's what makes college football great. I got 3 games you need to be on the lookout for. That's coming up next. First, this episode brought to you by ZBiotics. ZBiotics pre-alcohol and probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's the blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly and you'll feel your best tomorrow. As someone who has personal experience with this particular product, you will feel great during, you will feel great after, you will feel great the next day. It is a trifecta of phenomenalness. A word I just made up. Go to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege to learn more. Get 15% off your order when you use code LOCKEDONCollege at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, you won't be. They'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember, head to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at checkout for 15% off. I really want to trust Colorado in this spot. I got to ring the upset alert bell. So 3 games in which an unranked team could beat a ranked team. A couple of games didn't quite make the cut here. Miami at Georgia Tech. Cam Ward is playing way too well. Way too well. Miami's had close calls, but I didn't put him in here because Cam Ward is just the greatest duct tape, Band-Aid, call it whatever you want, to fix those situations. For Colorado, let's all recall that a few weeks ago at home, they needed a Hail Mary. They almost converted 2 in a row. They needed a Hail Mary to beat Baylor, who is seeing their head coach save his job game by game as they march towards bowl eligibility, which would probably save his job. But Colorado is favored by 3.5, according to our friends at FanDuel at Texas Tech. Here's the curious thing about this game. I feel so much more confident discussing what we're going to get from Colorado than I do Texas Tech. I see highs with Texas Tech, 22 points allowed at Iowa State to Rocco Becht Company on the road. Whew, that's great. 59 at home to Baylor? What? You gave up how many points? Abilene Christian scored 51 on your home field. Wait, how does that? I don't understand. That's because it doesn't make any sense. The up and down nature, this game will come down. I don't have a pick just yet, but this game will absolutely come down to Texas Tech's defense. And the fact that they can play so well on the road at times at Arizona, 22 points allowed. Now, is Arizona good? No. Turns out they're very much not any good. But the up and down nature makes me go, I don't know which Texas Tech team I'm getting. I think I know what I'm getting from Colorado. That doesn't mean I love it and think it can win the Big 12. And they have to win this game if they want to keep their Big 12 title hopes alive. But for all you Colorado haters out there, and I've been called that before, it's just patently ridiculous, of course. But for all you anti-Colorado, anti-Deion people out there, you better hope that Colorado loses this football game. Because Utah, Kansas, and Oklahoma State are not providing the sorts of threats that they looked to be on paper before the season began. And Colorado could end the year 10-2 with 1 loss in conference play. They still need help to make the Big 12 championship game, but help could very well be underway. So I think Colorado's been a much more consistent team this year than Texas Tech. So that's what I wonder about in this game. That's the first thing. Here's the second game. Here's the second game I've got upset alert. We're not even moving out of this conference because the Chaos Conference, that's what the Big 12 is, like the Joker, Heath Ledger Joker, Agent of Chaos, Big 12, Conference of Chaos. See? There we go. Iowa State is at Kansas this week. Now, allow me to just paint a little bit of a picture for you here. Iowa State is number 17 in the country. They're going to Kansas, who's 2-6. 2-6 Kansas. That isn't even playing games at their home stadium this year. So this is 40% a neutral site contest. What exactly do you think the point spread should be? for the 17th ranked team in the country, off of a loss, going to play a 2-6 football team. What do you think it should be? 8, 10, 12, 4? It's 3. It's 3. There are moments throughout a college football season when Vegas tries to send you a message. I am so considering Iowa State to get upset this week by the Kansas Jayhawks because, number one, it's the Chaos Conference. And number two, that line is shockingly small. That line set off alarm bells in my head immediately of up, hold on. Vegas knows something. Reminiscent of Washington hosting Michigan earlier this year. Michigan was number 10 in the country at the time. And Washington was favored by 2.5. And you went, wait, is that right? Can you really? Kansas not an outright favorite here. I think if they were playing at their home stadium, which is undergoing construction right now, this could be close to a pick'em, or Kansas is a slight favorite with a 2-6 record. So keep your ears just constantly listening for those beep, beep, beep. That sounded more like a golf cart backing up, but you get what I'm trying to convey here. The alarm for Iowa State, a game that, look, if you're a Colorado fan, going back to the bus for a moment, you are such a big Kansas Jayhawk fan. You would love nothing more. Colorado watched Houston win last week, and they were jumping for joy. They should have been out partying as if the football team had just won a game because they might as well have. Colorado was absolutely a lean win vibe for me last week, despite being on a bye, which is usually a no vibe special. But they got tremendous help. Iowa State loses to Texas Tech, who's already got 2 losses, and Colorado plays them this week. And Kansas State loses to Houston? I mean, are you kidding me? Couldn't have gone any better. There's still more work that Colorado needs to be done by teams not primarily located in Boulder, Colorado. And of course, the Buffs have to go into Lubbock and win the football game this week. But boy, they got a lot of help. And they are looking at this game being played in Kansas City and saying, rock, chalk, Jayhawk, KU, go Kansas. That's what every Colorado fan should be saying this week. Iowa State loses, and suddenly the doors open, and Colorado can control its own destiny to make the Big 12 championship game. But they have to beat Texas Tech in order to do that. Not going to be an easy feat, depending on which Texas Tech team shows up. Here's another one. This is outside the Big 12. Washington's going to Penn State. It's the whiteout game. Ohio State should have been the whiteout game. It should have been under the lights, but Big Noon really wanted to do that game, and the ESPN College Game Day crowd, let's just say, let their sentiments be known about how they felt about that, and I wholeheartedly agree with them. Penn State, Ohio State was a great game. Should have been under the lights. Should have been the whiteout, but it wasn't because television networks are not always, and in fact rarely are actually acting in the best interest of you, the college football fans, which I think is too bad because fans are what make the sport great, but I digress. Penn State's 2-touchdown favorite against Washington this week. Don't know if the Huskies can go get it done, but boy, they can put a scare into Penn State. So if you want a transitive property reason, here's one. USC was beating Penn State 20-6, and Penn State came back to win. Washington just beat USC. So at the very least, Washington's in the same vein as USC. I think everybody agree with that particular statement. So if USC can go toe-to-toe with Penn State, why can't Washington? Yeah, it's going to be an incredibly difficult environment. Washington has a tendency of self-inflicted wounds. If they stay away from that, they are really actually pretty good on offense. And they're pretty darn good on defense too. And Penn State's a good team. They are not a great team. That's what I've said all year, even when they were undefeated. And what do you know? They showed it again against Ohio State. They're good. They're a good football team. If you ask me right now, Spencer, which side of that game you want to be on, I am not taking Penn State minus 13.5. No way. No way would I be on that side of things. My score prediction will probably end up having Penn State winning, Washington covering. Haven't made it yet, but I'm just telling you, that's where I'd be leaning. So those are the 3 upset games. Penn State, Washington, Iowa State, Kansas, Colorado, Texas Tech. Unranked teams, they're going to win at least one of those football games. We'll just have to see which one I feel is most likely as the week goes on. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.